I don't know if you've ever done this, probably not, but I'm going to take a stab in the dark. You probably aren't occupying hobbies like hobbies that priests occupy. But over the past couple weeks, I've been doing a deep dive into looking at sermons online and sermons that have been written historically, and just sort of reviewing them to see about posture and form and message. I'm always interested in learning about new and different ways to become more specific and direct with the way that I approach my work, and so I look for the same. Have you ever done that before? Done a deep dive on sermons on YouTube? Or probably not. Yeah, it takes a special kind. It's interesting though. For the past 2 weeks, I've been doing this, and I'm noticing some similar sentiments, some similar messages that are delivered in a lot of the messages that I'm finding online. And it's interesting to me because it seems as though it echoes some sentiments that we have in our news and our media as well. And so this is a sentiment that I've sort of drawn out recently that I want to share with you. This is it. The world has never been this bad. The world has never been this bad. Our morals are this way, they should be this way. Our children are like this, they should be like that. Our society is going this direction, it should go this direction. And then some sort of scriptural critique, some sort of scriptural emphasis that supports that initial imperative, and then they wrap it up with this nice, neat bow to say, as a result of the world never being this bad, Christians should huddle together. Be found in the group of people that think like you and do like you and reaffirm the world as you understand the world, and hold tight to your church and hold tight to your faith. What do you think? Not all those responses are necessarily negative things, certainly. But I think we ought to reconsider the form here, just a little bit. Because in saying a phrase like, the world has never been this bad, and phrasing it like that, especially from the pulpit, it has specific consequences, doesn't it? It might seem as though, as a result of that the response to do all those things, hold tight to one another, huddle together, hold tight to your faith, it might seem as though that even might be the right response when you phrase it that way. A reasonable reaction even. But I would say in doing so, there's a woeful inability to really see and understand the transcendental nature, the transcendental call that Christ is beckoning us towards. Now, for the record, I just want to say, I never, ever want to be the priest that stands from this pulpit and gives you that kind of news. Because I do not believe that news, that the world has never been this bad, is the good news of Jesus Christ. And I know this in a definitive way because I know and I understand that we have something else. We have hope. We are resurrection people. And so I do not think that things are at their end. I think that things are changing, and that change is not necessarily the end of us, but instead the beginning of us. And what becomes an imperative is how we choose to interact with that reality, and that is what makes all the difference. Now, as I've discussed on a couple occasions, I've been the vicar, which means like a priest in charge or a rector of now over 15 parishes. And I just have 10 years of experience as a priest. 15 parishes. It's not, mind you, because I've been fired 15 times. It's just because my initial work in Canada and all over the United States has been with a multitude of parishes all at once. My first parish placement, 4. My second parish placement, 7, if you can imagine such a thing. And I'm beginning to think that part of my call as a priest has been to be a voice to remind people of the good news that Jesus Christ has for us. And the good news is not one that's calling you into a closer and tighter circle with those who believe just as you believe, who reaffirm your reality just as you understand it. This is not the transcendent spirit of Jesus Christ, and it does not speak to it. In fact, it's fundamentally not who we are as a converted people. Because as a converted people, we believe in the resurrection. But we can understand in hearing that the world has never been worse than it is today, that this is the easy place that people go. Now this morning, I want to speak with you of one particular parish I took and was blessed to serve, one of my first parishes that I took in Canada. This particular church was one of the older congregations in the diocese. It had a long history of challenges. There was a history of sexual abuse there, substance abuse by the clergy. They had money problems. They had people problems. They had property problems. They had problems. And when I arrived at the church to serve, there were about 20 people that were left in that congregation. They called themselves the hanger-oners. And for all intents and purposes, they were paralyzed, completely paralyzed. And so they followed the seemingly normal path in response to their condition, a feeling as though the world had never been this bad, that the church had never been this bad. And so what did they do? Well, they huddled together. They supported one another more and more intensely. They closed their network of connection. They no longer reached out to the neighboring parishes, the diocese, even the people in the community. And to some extent, they felt and acted as though they were all that they had. If we have nothing else, we have each other. Now, as you hear this story, I want to invite you to consider not only the condition of this parish, but how this might be a reflection of our own lives and our own society. Maybe it's a story of our family that's relative, or our relationships, or our own personal condition. But seeing the writing on the wall, seeing the condition of the things and the people in the parish, I can remember the first time that I went to take the pulpit there. I remember it because I know that doom and gloom sermon, and I knew that their situation was what it was, and that they were expecting and preparing themselves to hear that kind of sermon that day. To hear that the world and the church had never been this bad. They were expecting to hear me say to them that we, meaning me and the diocese, had decided outside of them that we are going to make decisions that are best for you, and this is what we're going to do. They were ready to hear, even worse yet, that I was going to be the priest that was going to walk with them to their organizational death. And I have to be honest with you, I was very new to Cure. Just a few months in, that was the sermon that I wrote. That was the sermon that I had prepared that day. That was what I was planning to give. But in walking up to that pulpit, I realized that was not the good news that they needed to hear. And I know that even more clearly today. That the good news that they needed to hear was this: I've been sent here to love you and to serve you and to help you figure out what that new news of hope might mean. And so that's the message I delivered. My first sermon there was about 3 minutes long. And then at the end of that sermon, I asked them this question: so what's next? And the short telling of this story is that together we figured out what was next. But we didn't do it by huddling together or shutting down or siloing off or by becoming an island unto ourselves, but by remembering that we had strength in unity and purpose, strength through the hope of the resurrection. That we were, in fact, resurrection people. I tell you this story because this is the gospel message that we have for us today. And the message is this: that the world has never been this good. And now, being a converted person, one who understands what that transcendental nature is, that resurrection nature, being the people who believe in that type of hope, the question becomes, what are we willing to do about it? How are we willing to share it? Jesus, as he sits in his room in what would appear to be a denial of his family and the people that love him, his mothers and his brothers who sit outside. He's not rejecting them. They're his mothers and his brothers and his sisters. But what he's doing is he's instead paying direct attention to the people and the mission that's sitting right in front of his feet. And he's heightening their responsibility to now go and do the will of the Father. What does he say? You who do the will of the Father, you are my brothers and my sisters. And in doing so, he's awakening them to the fact that what may have seemed like an inner circle, his family, what might have appeared as a closed circuit, is in fact open to all who believe, all who are willing to be transformed. And he leaves them with hope. And so my prayer is this. May we who are converted by the true Spirit of Jesus Christ be willing to understand and see this world not for its despair, but for its opportunity. May we be harbingers of that hope. Amen.